Hey everyone, welcome to the Freedom to Flourish podcast. I'm Dr. Joel Miller here with Dr. Tim Augustiniak. We're back at it again, guys. In this episode, we're talking about getting off of your antidepressant. We're talking about overall what happens when with our health at the biochemical level, and of course there can be other factors as well. But what happens with our health when people are needing to actually get on to these different medications? What can we do to support your body with detoxing these things, with supporting your own production of serotonin and dopamine, and ultimately how you don't have to be dependent on these meds for the rest of your life. Dr. Tim, I am excited to be here with you as always. I know a lot of patients either call in from our free consults or just appointments that we have every week. Oftentimes, people are on different antidepressants. And of course, while we don't have the legal prescriptive rights as doctors of chiropractic, and we don't change their prescription, oftentimes we're working with people and we're seeing a lot of kind of red flags with their gut health and serotonin and dopamine production and all these different things. And we're helping people basically go from wherever they're at, which is usually not feeling great, on different medications. On medications, let me kind of rephrase that. They're on different medications and still not feeling great. And ultimately,
there.
Yeah. And ultimately, they want to get to the point where their body is actually healthy and not dependent on drugs. And so, of course, what we do with our holistic approach is go in and figure out, okay, what's going on with the body, what's going on with the health, and how can we support the body in healing itself in these ways, and then ultimately getting off of these things so people aren't dependent on drugs. And Dr. Tim, I'm sure that you'd probably agree with this, but we've been able to help countless people do it. It's one of those things that I think, Dr. Tim, helping people to heal their body to where they don't have to be on meds, and especially in regards to serotonin and dopamine and different antidepressants. This is something that has become so common that we help people with, that it's not like really a special thing when we talk about it, at least for you and I. Yet I know that in other parts of the holistic world, in just the health in general, the health world in general, I know it can be very difficult. And so, Dr. Tim, welcome. I'm glad you're here. And I think we've got some good things to get into. And I think this will be really helpful for those people that are just looking to actually help their body heal itself and get off these different antidepressants.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a great episode. Like you said, we see this all the time, and it never ceases to amaze me the reaction that I will get when I'm on phone calls with people or at their first visit when they bring up that they're on this classification of medication, and they just react so, I guess, surprised. They're just flabbergasted when I say or ask, would you like to get off of these medications? Is your goal with wanting to come into the office and seek a more natural route with your health to get away from medications and allow your underlying, biochemistry to do its job on its own, to allow your nervous system to do its job on its own? And they're like, oh, I didn't realize that was a possibility. Yeah, of course. Yeah. I would absolutely love to get away from the medications. There's people that come in and they've got a whole laundry list of meds that they, some of them, I mean, it's impossible to get off of. If you've had your thyroid removed and you need hormone, well, we can dwindle the amount that your body requires as long as we're, dealing with the underlying things that makes your body more sensitive to the thyroid hormone. And as long as you're working very closely and we're co-managing with your prescribing physician on that, we can get to where we reduce medications, if not completely get away. Now, like you said, it's not something that we can say, oh yeah, we're going to completely get you off this without help elsewhere. Because what we can do is help your body function as it's supposed to by dealing with inflammation, by dealing with detox defects, by dealing with stress hormone issues, other hormone imbalances, things like that. However, in the case of reducing medications, we always say, consult your prescribing physician. We need to know what they say. Keep updated with them along with care, so they know that you're working with us, and then at the same time, they have the insight to what is an appropriate, decrease in dose over time to get off of this stuff, or if you can just straight up get off of it based off blood work and things that they will do in their offices. But at the end of the day, it's always incredible when we help people get away from this stuff, because these are so, I would argue, overprescribed in our world nowadays, and they are so mind-numbing. A lot of times people don't feel great when they're on them. It might help with their anxiety, but it will contribute to things like brain fog. It'll make them feel like a zombie, where they're just emotionally numb to their family, to their their spouse, their kids, all of those things. And although it's helping with one symptom, it's not worth the offset, or they just straight up can't function without them. And so they need to be on these medications to fix it. So what we would like to get into today is what causes these issues in the first place, how we can align the body to improve underlying health for the sake of giving your body the best chance at producing these things on your own, or the sufficient neurotransmitters that lead to these symptoms in the first place when they're low. But then from there, what the step-by-step process looks like to make your way away from this stuff. So all in all, the medications that we are referring to are your SSRIs, your SNRI medications, so your selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors or your selective norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors. I read something recently that acronym could also mean serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor as well. And basically all that means is serotonin and dopamine, they are both of our feel-good, happy, motivation, fulfillment neurotransmitters. And what neurotransmitters do is they allow neurons to communicate. So depending on what kind of neurotransmitter one neuron spits out for the other to perceive and sense and pass down another neurological signal, we'll have depending on which kind you produce, your adjacent neuron that senses this neurotransmitter will have a different reaction. It will pass a different signal depending on which neurotransmitter it senses. And so in our brain, serotonin and dopamine just make us feel happy, motivated, all those things, content. And so if we don't have enough, that's where we start to get things like anxiety, depression, all of that. What these medications do is, instead of increasing the amount of serotonin or dopamine that you produce, say you, in an ideal world, will produce 10 serotonins an hour. But if your body breaks down 10 serotonins an hour, it's kind of a net neutral. Well, say you can only produce 1 per hour because for some reason your body is not making what it needs to. If you are used to having 10 per hour, you're going to feel upset. You're going to be anxious. You're going to be depressed. And so say the breakdown rate is 10 per hour. Just like I said, you produce 10 per hour, you break down 10 per hour. If you're producing 1 per hour and you're breaking down 10 per hour, then you're basically not going to have much of a reaction with that 1, because it'll only take a couple minutes for it to go away. So you'll have 54 minutes out of the hour that you're not perceiving that serotonin or dopamine. Well, say you allow that 1 serotonin or dopamine to then be perceived for that full hour. Well, if that's the case, then you'll have that same effect as the other ones that were ideally supposed to be produced. And so what these medications do is they keep that amount of serotonin or dopamine that you are producing around for a longer time, so then therefore it can interact with neurons and have the same perpetuation of its signal, with having less production of it in the first place. So it basically just inhibits the breakdown in what we call the synaptic cleft. So in your synapse, there's this little gap between the neurons and their little finger-like projections that neurotransmitters and then sense the neurotransmitters and then pass down the signals. In that gap, you have enzymes that break these things down. Well, these medications will inhibit that reuptake or that breakdown of these neurotransmitters. And so you'll just perpetuate that signal longer. So they can make people, feel better as far as their main symptom goes, but there are other side effects. And so our goal today is to talk about, well, why is it that you're not producing enough of this in the first place? So Dr. Joel, add whatever you'd like to that. And then why don't you walk us through where our neurotransmitters are made?
Yeah, absolutely. For our listeners, that was a really great explanation from Dr. Tim about what kind of happens with these different antidepressants. And to kind of summarize, your body's overall production of serotonin hormones and dopamine usually reduces, but the way that the meds help is they don't help your body actually make more. They just keep it around longer. and they kind of reduce your body breaking it down, so it kind of keeps it around longer. But if what he had kind of explained seemed a little bit like tricky to understand, go back and listen again, because it's a really good explanation. But I know there's different pieces there. Yes, when it comes to neurotransmitter production, so the big thing here is that roughly they say 99% of serotonin is made in your gut health. And I think it's one of those things where it's basically like, well, we can't guarantee like 100%, but it's basically like, hey, your serotonin is made in your gut health. And then when it comes to dopamine, it's like 50% of that is made in your gut health, and then the other 50% other places, your brain being a big one. And so when we talk about gut health, when we talk about serotonin and dopamine, we have to talk about gut health. And when we talk about gut health, we have to talk about nutrition, we have to talk about infections, we have to talk about potential food sensitivities. And then there's other aspects of our health too that really impact gut health. Like a simple one I would say is movement. When we move, we're pushing blood into different tissues, we're pulling out different toxins, which then recirculate through the liver and get detoxed out through the body, and all these different things. So movement is super, super important for gut health. Getting good sleep is important for gut health. Fasting is good for gut health. And the reason for those two is because those are the two times where our gut gets a break from food and can actually go into different repair processes. So those are a couple different things. And then I think in general, when it comes to gut health, having like just good mental health is important. And that's kind of a catch-22, right? Because the gut health will impact your mental health, but your mental health can also impact your gut health. And so that kind of analogy is like, if you have a big event or something coming up and you're really stressed about it, that can cause you to have gut issues. So like that connection goes both ways. But having like good mental space and things like that can be really important. And then I would also argue just in general, like having good spiritual health is important. So if there's anything that you've experienced, whether there's generational stuff or trauma or whatever, and you need some kind of deliverance, like that's definitely something you should seek out from a God-fearing person. So in general, though, these hormones are coming from the gut. Now, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that with serotonin. And of course, we'll get into what nutrients we can take to support our body with that serotonin production. And we'll talk about dopamine as well. But that other 50% of dopamine, rather than being something that the body creates as a result of the gut microbiome and the different bacteria and so forth in our gut, the other 50% of that dopamine just happens in our brain and throughout our nervous system. And it's going to happen from having specific nutrients. We call them cofactors. Those are going to be some of the things that we'll talk about here in just a little bit as well, for what's going to help your body actually produce these things naturally. So we've got the gut health. The gut health is the top production source for these hormones. So if you've listened to many people talk about the holistic approach to depression and antidepressants and all this stuff, that's the reason why people talk about the gut health and food so often. Dr. Tim, we've really got a lot of things here with the gut health we could get into. I mean, we could talk about infections a little bit more. We could talk about nutrition a little bit more and how that impacts the bacterial microbiome balance. What else do you think we should add to some of the things that just went through there?
I mean, you really hit on it. Just briefly speaking, if there is some sort of microbiome balance, antimicrobial herbs, things along that line can be very, very beneficial to fix that. And so if you are interested in learning more about that, because as far as it goes for how we fix this in the office, this is always a very in-depth conversation that we have with patients. However, for the sake of the time with this episode, I heavily encourage you to listen to our gut episodes. I believe we have part 1, part 2, and part 3 of gut health. So please tune into that and to hear how exactly we go about healing the gut. Because if the gut's not healed, you're not going to produce these neurotransmitters. You're going to feel depressed. And there's not really a way to get off of the medications at that point. Because as a part of the way of getting patients off these medications, I always like to talk about how patients come in and they will say, I've tried to get off of these things before. I've tried weaning. I've tried going cold turkey. I've tried all these things and I just feel like crap every time. It doesn't matter how slow I go or how fast I go. I just feel terrible. With that being the case, it's because the gut and the underlying biochemistry that should be aligned to produce these neurotransmitters is not able to do so. So in order to make it much easier to get off of these, we need to, before we do anything, before we modify any dosing on stuff, we need to start healing the gut so you can make neurotransmitters. So listen to the gut episode.
Yeah, definitely.
Beyond that, let's get into the next things that we have on our note here. So beyond gut health. So another thing that's going to greatly impact your dopamine and serotonin sensitivity is overconsumption of media, overconsumption of just about anything that's addictive. We did a episode on overcoming addiction that I would heavily encourage you to listen to, because we talk about strategies to get away from these things, and to basically practice mindfulness for the sake of reducing the amount of dopamine or serotonin production that you have all the time. There's something called a dopamine or serotonin pool, where, to put this in totally arbitrary numbers, say your body is used to having 10 dopamines at one time. It break down 10 at a time. It can produce 10 at a time. Say the average level that you have is 10 though. So say you have some sort of really, really a good thing happen to you. Somebody gives you a gift, or you have a really good meal, or you had a great workout or something. If you can produce 10 dopamines at one time as a kind of like a feel-good boost to all those endorphins that make you feel good after accomplishing something or experiencing something good, that's 100% increase from your 10%, or I'm sorry, your 10 to your 20 that are now there. So you're going to have a significant change there. However, if you are repetitively seeking out these fulfilling, if you're watching the video, I have air quotes out here, fulfilling activities, like doom scrolling or overconsumption of things like soda, junk food, I guess falsely fulfilling things, you'll get to where you have way too many dopamines or serotonin, molecules circulating too much. And when that's the case, say, you can only produce that 10 at a time, like I said before. So if you have 100 dopamine or 100 serotonin, and you can only produce 10 in relative to the same stimulus that you got before, like with a good workout or good meal, whatever, that's only a 10% increase. And so you go from 100 to 110. And so your body is not going to have that same feeling of accomplishment or fulfillment, or you're not going to be excited or happy with that stuff. You're just going to feel rather neutral. It's relatively speaking, it doesn't change a whole lot. And so as a part of detoxifying this overabundance of neurotransmitters that are there at that point, you need to stay away from that stuff. Start reading a book instead of scrolling through Instagram. Instead of, I guess having a coffee addiction, swap it out for something else, and just practice avoiding things, and use that as almost like a meditation, and focusing your desire for that and trying to overcome that. And that goes the same way with just about anything in your life that you really struggle with, as far as it goes for addiction. At the end of the day, if you need your coffee every day, that's an addiction. There may not be some chemical like nicotine in it that hooks you to it, but we can very, very easily get addicted to things through neurotransmitters, and that surge of them that we get. And then if we get it, we just won't be happy. So that's kind of the next step with things, is just almost like a mindfulness thing. Be aware of the things that make you feel that way, and these habits that you're doing, and stay away. So anything to add there, Dr. Joel?
Yeah, no, that's great. Obviously we live, in a society, like you said, where we are just bombarded with dopamine hits. And you alluded to this, but I'll phrase it in a slightly different way, is that when we get those hits and our dopamine spikes, usually that baseline where we normally sit actually drops down lower. And then in order to get that same high, we have to get even more dopamine. And so basically, the more that our baseline drops down, the more addiction prone we are, the more we're seeking out dopamine hits, because our body wants to feel balanced and happy. But there's different things you can do naturally to bring that baseline up. And so we'll get into some of the supplements and different nutrients, improving gut health, eating well, exercise brings the baseline up, some kind of cold water therapy, like a cold shower or cold plunging, also brings up that baseline. And those things can be extremely extremely beneficial. So next, Dr. Tim, we've got the genes. So you talked about this a little bit, but there's some genetic mutations that can kind of alter the breakdown of serotonin and dopamine, and that can impact things. We have not talked about genetics that much that I recall. I think that we probably should have an episode to some extent with that. But we have MAO and COMT, which are pretty classic, just kind of methylation, and just detox pathways that are impacting the breakdown of these hormones. And so, Dr. Tim, what's kind of the synopsis of genetics and how they play a role with some of these things? Are the genetics something that you're really focused on with people? Do you find that this is really a big deal with people with depression, serotonin, and dopamine issues? Or what's kind of your take? How much weight do you give the genetic side of things?
That's a difficult one to answer. How much weight do I actually put into this? Because I mean, I would argue that if say you were a patient that came into my office, if we were having this conversation in the office, I would probably say, for the sake of moving past this and maintaining good health, it is important to understand that if you have some sort of genetic SNP that keeps you from accomplishing the action of these enzymes appropriately, then you will require more nutrients for maintenance to accomplish the same amount of work as somebody who would not have those genetic SNPs. So what I mean by that, so SNPs are, it's an acronym, single nucleotide polymorphisms. That's fancy talk for genes that downregulate your ability to accomplish these actions with these enzymes. So with methylation, it's absolutely huge. There's Gary Brecka and all these docs that have kind of changed into, basically influencer status with all of their health takes and all that stuff. And they have all their testing that they'll do with patients. But Gary Brecka is huge when it comes to genes that dictate your ability to methylate and how efficiently you will, how you produce the enzymes that accomplish that, all those things. So if you do not produce the monoamine oxidase enzyme as efficiently, or your body does not utilize it as efficiently, same with the COMT, catechol O methyl transferase enzyme. If you don't do that as efficiently, you're just not going to break stuff down as well. At the end of the day, you are not going to get rid of stuff at that point. And so how much weight does that actually carry clinically? If somebody is more or less difficult to detoxify these things or move past this, I would argue that they have probably some genetic steps that contribute to it being a bit more difficult. However, I would argue that it is very, I don't want to say ignorant, but it's difficult to say that just because somebody has a hard time moving away from dopamine, serotonin addiction, or moving away from these medications, that they automatically have a genetic issue with it. Some people could just have just low willpower. They're just not staying away from the overconsumption of stuff. And they really struggle to move back past that because maybe they don't have a support group, or they just, for some whatever reason, that's not my wheelhouse. The underlying, I guess, psychological reasons for why they can't move past that. But if you cannot break these things down as well, you're going to have a bit harder time in the long term maintaining good health in this regard. But that's where, regardless of whether somebody has an issue with this or not, I will almost always recommend continuing to utilize like a methylated B complex, something like that, where you are always reintroducing the methyl donors that help these enzymes do their job in breaking things down and supporting this detoxification. Because whether you have a genetic thing that predisposes you to not doing it properly, or you don't, our foods are not as nutrient dense these days. Our body is full of nasty chemicals. I would argue that the overwhelming majority of the population has some degree of suboptimal methylation. If that's the case, even if it is a fraction of the I guess, improvement in detoxification, that somebody who actually has genetic issues with this, by taking the methylated B complex, it's still worth it to do. And I'll tell people, say we get you to where all of your anxiety, all your depressive symptoms are completely gone. And like 3 to 4 months, you're like, I feel like things are coming back a little bit. Well, that's your sign to understand, okay, well, I was feeling like this before we did this during care. Maybe I should reintroduce some of those nutrients that help push me across that finish line and get me back to where I was. And usually it's things like St. John's wort, it's methyl donors like methylated B complexes, methylated B9, B12, all of those things, trimethylglycine, all of those things. And more often than not, if you just stay on a maintenance protocol like that, it does really well and you feel really, really good. And so understanding that there can be medications that make it more or less difficult for you, and being perceptive of how your body does over time is where the significance in the genes come from, or I guess what it's rooted in and what you should be or should not be doing to maintain good health. So anyway, talk more about that stuff in the addiction podcast. So at the end of the day, it kind of boils back to methylation. So if we're going to improve methylation, how do we do that? Well, you can provide your body with the resources to methylate, but also, just like almost any process in our body that we talk about with inflammation, hormone detox, detoxification of really anything, there is the faucet and the drain in this analogy, in this situation. So if you have way too much pouring into your sink through your faucet to where your drain cannot keep up, regardless of how many nutrients you have, the faucet must be turned down, or else we're never going to overcome that problem. And so that's where the, I guess, addictive personality stuff comes in. Avoiding the doom scrolling. If you really like caffeine, try avoiding it. If you really like gambling, don't do it. Whatever your vices are, stay away and do your best to move past that and decrease the consumption of it. But then from there, that's where we need to unclog that drain. Open it up with methyl donors and various nutrients that help detoxify stuff. Because if we do not support those properly, and you can't allow these enzymes to do their job, you can't really fix this problem. If those enzymes didn't exist, you wouldn't be able to get rid of this stuff. And everybody has them. It's just a matter of how efficiently they do their job, depending on environmental factors with your habits, as well as it goes for nutrients that help accomplish these reactions.
Yeah, that's good. I think my 2 cents on some of the genetic stuff before we kind of move on to getting into, okay, hey, what do we do here to support detoxing the meds, support methylation, support overall the body producing its own neurotransmitters, serotonin and dopamine. The 2 cents I would add is that we talk about the word epigenetics, which is like basically saying, hey, genes can almost be like turned on or off for simple, lingo. A lot of times with genetics, it's like, okay, from a very objective standpoint, it's like, this is what you've gotten from your parents and your family. Okay. There's nothing that you can do to change the genetics. And so let's focus on everything that we can outside of that, as far as your environment, your gut health, the toxins in your system, nutrient deficiencies. Let's focus on all of these things and help whatever genetics you have to function as best as they possibly can. And the good news is, most of the time, that's enough. Most of the time, that's enough to where the body can actually get to a point where it is functioning optimally. It's healthy. It's not having a ton of issues, things like that. But there's a lot that goes into what I just said there. There's a lot that goes into that. Creating that environment and scenario where your body is fully functioning, it's super optimal. That requires a lot of cleaning up and things like that. So, all right, Dr. Tim, what to get into next? I know we've got a piece here about the kind of methylation and that kind of thing, but I'm kind of thinking we jump into overall supporting detoxing the meds, and then also increasing overall neurotransmitter production.
Yeah. Let's get through that, and then we should be good. So with detoxifying these medications, more often than not, and we've talked about it before, when it comes to clearing out medications, the combo that we will most often see test to clear those out is a specific form of B12 as well as B9. So hydroxycobalamin, so the hydroxy form of B12, and then folic acid, not 5-MTHF, not your, whatever other forms, not the, tetrahydrofolate, you name it, just straight up folic acid, which is technically a synthetic form. However, these two in combination, I have seen it work for anesthetic after surgery. I've seen it work for severe lidocaine reactions. I've seen it react and detoxify extreme hormonal issues following utilizing things like Plan B, all types of different medications. It's actually detoxifying. And the most common instance that I will see it test and work really well is to detoxify the excess serotonin or dopamine as a result of these medications. So if you are wanting to get off of these medications, I mean, that's as simple as getting your hands on hydroxy B12 and folic acid to start helping detoxify that. But then from there, once we get past the detoxification process, that's where we need to encourage neurotransmitter production. So whenever I walk patients through this, I say, okay, well, we should ideally take at least 2 weeks or so, bare minimum, to help your body detoxify this at a pretty high dose of B12 and the folic acid. Because you start adding in things like St. John's wort or other neurotransmitter support nutrients that will deliberately push serotonin and dopamine production, you can get where you have too much. And if you have too much, you will not feel well at all. And so the conundrum that we have here is oftentimes with this, we will see that off of the gut, we'll see a need for serotonin support. And that's where St. John's wort or other nutrients that help support it will test. But the problem with that is low serotonin in the gut, but these medications affect the brain. And so there will already be too much going on in your head. If there's too much up here and not enough here, and you give St. John's wort or something else to help the gut produce more, all of that extra serotonin or dopamine, whatever you're producing in the gut, will go up to the brain, and you will get serotonin syndrome. Yep. And that's where serotonin syndrome makes you feel like absolute garbage. I've seen people they feel like they're going to pass out, episodes of dizziness, vomiting, extreme brain fog, mental instability, anxiety, depression symptoms, way worse, severe problems as a whole that ideally sufficient neurotransmitters would fix. But the problem is there's that happy place in the middle. And so detoxify using the hydroxy B12 and the folic acid, wait a couple weeks while you're doing that. And then from there, encourage production through St. John's wort, magnesium, zinc, B6, and some other things as well. But quite honestly, more often than not, when people get off these medications, it's do a couple weeks on your detoxification combo. And then from there, get on St. John's and things sort themselves out and you're good to go. That's usually the cadence that I end up seeing.
Yep. That's good. That's good. One of the biggest things I think in jumping into this, piggybacking onto what you just said about overall neurotransmitter production, we've got to support the gut, right? So obviously, number one, nutrition wise, we need to be eating a really good, we need to have really good nutrition. I don't really love the word diet, so I try to stay away from that word, but we should have really good nutrition. What does that look like? Well, it looks like eating whole foods, nothing processed. Is there a time and place to have some processed foods? Like, yeah, of course, every once in a while, but eating whole foods as your 80%, maybe 90% of your nutrition is key. And so when we talk about whole foods, of course, we're talking about one ingredient items. A banana, the one ingredient is a banana. Chicken, the one ingredient is chicken, and that kind of thing. With gut health, we usually talk about blood sugar as well. If you've listened to any of our episodes, you've come across that. But eating enough protein is really important for the gut health, the liver, and overall blood sugar. Protein helps our body to be able to have the things it needs to detox. And then protein also can help with the amino acids. Those are the foundation of serotonin and dopamine. Those are the very first things like tryptophan and so forth that help to make these hormones. So that's super, super important. But Dr. Tim, I think what I find most of the time with people that have chronic depression and chronic anxiety issues is I will usually find some kind of gut infections. Parasites are super common. If you have bloating or gas, then usually there's an issue with either bacteria buildup or fungus buildup in the gut. And a lot of times, to be honest, when people have really been anxious or depressed for months and sometimes years, I'll usually find there's some combination of all three. There's just a party going on in the gut health. And so we go into our muscle testing and we check different herbs that are going to help their immune system to strengthen and come against those infections and clean those out. But then we also have to support detoxing and things like that. When it comes to overall helping the gut heal, so often I find number one, St. John's wort is probably the most common herb. And of course, that's going to be one that is naturally just going to overall support the gut and healing itself as your gut makes serotonin from the St. John's wort. But I would say out of all the success I've had with people getting off their antidepressants, going after infections to take the stress off of your gut health, eating well, and then adding in that St. John's wort has probably been the most simple kind of summary of how people have been able to do so well. But then I would say there's other nutrients that can be super helpful as well. Things like zinc can be super helpful. Things like B6, which we talked about a little bit, and magnesium I find to be very, very important as well. Just a couple side notes with things as far as different supplements with St. John's wort. I love to use Supreme Nutrition's St. John's wort in capsules. Usually people are needing like one capsule twice a day. Depending on the level of things, sometimes they might need more. It just depends. Magnesium, I would say magnesium calm is a super common one. And you might take like half a teaspoon twice a day. If you have a lot of issues with constipation, you might do 1 teaspoon twice a day. Or if you're really constipated, you might do 1 teaspoon 3 times a day. Zinc, I like zinc chelates from Standard Process. Usually people are doing 2 twice a day, somewhere along those lines. And then B6 phosphate from Biotics is pretty good. Usually people are doing 2 twice a day, that kind of thing. So a couple of different things there. As always, take supplements, take meds, take everything, at your own risk. And ideally work with somebody that's able to give you some guidance on exactly what's going to be best for you with that. But also with supplements, if somebody tells me, hey, I want to try it, what do you think about the supplement? A lot of times I tell them, hey, here's my thoughts on it. But at the end of the day, if you want to try it, try it, give it usually 48 to 72 hours, give it 2 to 3 days. You should notice within that time if it's helpful for you or if it's bad for you. So sometimes I tell people, hey, you're welcome to try it. Just give it 2-3 days, see how you feel, and then kind of decide after those 2-3 days, if you feel like you notice good improvement, you might stay on it. If you notice it made things worse, get off of it. And if you didn't really notice much at all, then it's probably not that helpful for you. So those are kind of my 2 cents with that. Nutrition, St. John's wort, different nutrients like magnesium, B6, zinc, and then oftentimes I'll find methylfolate, the 5-MTHF as well, to be super helpful. I like Thorn 1 milligram capsules. Usually people are taking 1 or 2 twice a day, and that can really help support their mood, especially, when they're depressed, but also like irritable, things like that. And just those nutrients in general can be important. And then probably I would say the last little thing here for overall support with helping your body to produce these neurotransmitters themselves, I would say exercise. I'd say we should be moving our body. It's good for our gut health. It's good for our brain health. It's good for mental clarity. You get up in the morning and go on like a long walk or a nice run, maybe a 2-mile run, something simple. That is going to be so good for helping to move your lymph and help with detoxing, cleaning out your brain, all of those things. So those are kind of my 2 cents on things, Dr. Tim, there when it comes to increasing serotonin and dopamine naturally. Is there anything else that you would add to that, or should we start wrapping up here soon?
I think you covered it all. Heal the gut with all the things that we just talked about, and encourage neurotransmitter production. I mean,
Totally.
it ends up being as simple as that. It's just putting it into practice, and the steps to get there. So, hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode.
And for those,
go ahead.
Sorry to butt in, Dr. Tim. Last comment here for those that are actively looking to get off of these. Again, best case scenario, you're working with some kind of holistic doc, or even maybe a allopathic doc, your medical doctor or primary doctor that is familiar with some of these nutrients. I can't tell you how many times patients will tell me they asked their, psychiatrist or their primary doctor about St. John's wort for the gut health and increasing serotonin, and 98% of the time the doctor has no idea like what they're talking about. And so it's an unfortunate observation I've had, but I usually encourage people, like, if your situation is really, really serious, where like your body's really sensitive to serotonin and dopamine issues, you need to work with somebody that's going to help you, guide you through that process, so you don't have any setbacks or anything like that. But otherwise, I know there's a lot of people, Dr. Tim, that are just kind of thrown on these meds, and if they missed a day or two, they usually don't really notice that much of a difference. Those are the types of people that obviously it's less intense. There's more room for error with things, and you can add in some of these supplements and kind of see how you feel with things. So wanted to provide a couple different kind of scenarios there. But Dr. Tim, I think that this has been helpful. Any other thoughts? Otherwise, let's go ahead and wrap up, because we got to get our day going here.
Yes, sir. Let's wrap up. So I am Dr. Tim Augustiniak down here at Flourish Functional Wellness Center in Ville, Arkansas. If you want to find me online, my website is draugustiniak.com. That's draugustiniak.com. You can also find it at flourishfwc.com as well. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or suggestions for future episodes, you can find links to all my socials as well as the contact info for the office on the website. And as always, reach out if you need anything.
Yep. Love it. And I'm Dr. Joel Miller. The practice here is Freedom Health and Wellness in Flower Mound, Texas. You can find me online at drjoelmiller.com. If you guys have any questions or need any guidance or direction, give us a call, shoot us a text. And if you want to get in contact with me on Instagram, it's drjoelmiller. You should be able to find me pretty easily on there. Guys, I hope that this has been helpful. We love your feedback, so keep it coming with things. What episodes you want to hear about next, and what you appreciated in previous episodes. Blessings, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your week.